Hello, everybody. Welcome to Timeshare, the Timeshare Show. My name's Nick Pallavita. I will be your director for today's show, but I will not be your host and moderator. Instead, we're going to bring in the person who's the host of the show, who's actually a timeshare advocate that you've seen on the Pod TV network many times, Irene Parker. Irene, welcome to your show, as I would say.
Well, thank you. It's good to be back. It's good. It's a weekly show because many things in timeshare are ongoing. And as I happen to be in Orlando today en route to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals in Atlanta for Thursday on Steins versus Westgate. So we're very happy to have attorney Howard Prosniks on with us this week. But what I will be attending on Thursday, along with our first guest from February 26 on Timeshare Solution or Surrender, Taya is attending, and past guest Carl, who has been in the forefront of Westgate Resorts exit, will be joining us, along with a paralegal who is also in dispute with Wyndham. So there's quite an interesting similarity between the lawsuits that Howard Prosniks has filed against Westgate and Wyndham and the Westgate oral arguments this coming Thursday. Mm-hmm. What Steins versus Westgate is the Military Lending Act. And the military prohibits arbitration, which I think is proof enough that arbitration is unfair to consumers. And jurisdiction is near the resort, which makes it difficult for someone who's active duty military. Howard Prosniks' lawsuit, the most recent one filed on March 25th with the Yorks and the Physics, has a subclass of military pertaining to the Service Members Civil Relief Act, or the SCRA, where if you are active duty, before you became active duty, if you have a high interest rate loan, while you were in service, the lender is required to reduce that to 6%. And Taya had sent 74 emails to Wyndham and was ignored. We sent them the link to this show, and while they did come back, it was something where she would have lost a considerable amount of money for no reason, because it should be not debatable. You're either eligible for that SCRA lowered rate or not. And we talk a lot about timeshare targeting the elderly. And I sometimes think the young are more vulnerable than the elderly, because the young are trying to buy cars and houses, and even maybe if you're working in banking, you don't want to default on your record. So it's interesting that in the Yorks and Physics versus Wyndham lawsuit, the Yorks are in their 70s. He is diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and he also has another debilitating medical condition besides Alzheimer's. And his wife, Carol, relies on a service dog. But then on the other end of the spectrum, we have the Physics with Taya as active duty Army. And so that is two separate law firms, Westgate, Steins versus Westgate, with a different law firm. And then we have Howard Prosniks with Kirchner is one, and then the York. So he's going to come on stage with us now and help us sort through all of these legal actions. And I'm going to be taking a lot of notes, I'm sure. Howard, thank you for coming to the show.
Yeah, but before I bring an introduction, because we do redistribute on iHeartRadio and also Spotify, I have to say this disclaimer: this show is for education only. It is not legal advice. For legal advice, consult your own attorney. Ta-da! So now the thing is, not to say that'll get us off the hook, but at least we can say, well, they should know that's what we said. But let's bring our special guest in. This is Howard Prosniks, who's a consumer class action lawyer based in Chicago. He's been pursuing litigation on behalf of Wyndham and Worldmark cases since 2019. He recently won an important case in the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals Bedgood versus Wyndham. The court held that Wyndham's arbitration clause, naming the American Arbitration Association as the sole arbitrator, was not enforceable because Wyndham does not comply with the association rules. He's a graduate of Stanford Law School, the litigation partner and 50-attorney Chicago firm before starting his own practice. So we have what I call a real SME. People don't know what an SME is. How about a subject matter expert on timeshare and class action suits? None other than Howard Prospect. Howard, welcome to your show.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Irene. And thank you for the disclaimer. I like that. That's an important disclaimer. This is not legal advice. These are just observations by someone who has been doing timeshare litigation now for a number of years.
Was the year 2019 your first foray into?
Yes, it was. Just to kind of just give you an overview of what's happened in the last 5 years. We started with a case called Deneen versus Wyndham in the Northern District of Illinois. Wyndham contested personal jurisdiction there, and the court agreed and dismissed without prejudice, meaning we're free to refile the case either in Delaware or Florida. Delaware because that's where Wyndham Vacation Resorts Inc. is incorporated. Florida because that's where their principal place of business is. So we refiled a case called Kirchner versus Wyndham in the District Court of Delaware. That's a putative class action for people without arbitration clauses. And class certification has been fully briefed, and we're waiting for a decision, which could take months. One point I want to just emphasize at the outset here is the way a class action works. Since doing these cases, I've been flooded with telephone calls and emails saying, I want to join your class action. That's not the way class actions work. We have enough class representatives at this point, meaning we have several people who are seeking to act on behalf of the class. It's up to the court to decide whether to certify the class. If the court certifies the class and approves it, then people within the class definition will get notice. So the best thing to do with these cases is just follow the court docket. It's all a matter of public record. People can go and see what classes we're seeking to certify and whether or not they would be included. And I emphasize there's no guarantee that we'll get certification. If we do, that would, of course, be very, very significant. And then if you're not within the class definition, you have options, which would include JAMS arbitration or going to Irene, who I think is an incredibly effective timeshare advocate and strikes me as a much better alternative than many of the traditional timeshare exit attorneys. So the next case we filed was Bedgood versus Wyndham. That was filed in the Middle District of Florida. That was filed for people with arbitration clauses. Mr. Bedgood and some of the other plaintiffs in that class had filed demands with the American Arbitration Association seeking to arbitrate their claims. The American Arbitration Association declined to hear the claims because Wyndham does not follow its rules, particularly with respect to forum selection clauses and limitations on punitive damages. So since the arbitration demands were not heard by the AAA, we filed suit in Florida. Then Wyndham moves to compel arbitration back in front of the AAA. We objected. It was a motion to compel arbitration that was filed. The magistrate actually suggested ruling in favor of seeking to compel arbitration. We objected to that report to the district judge. The district judge agreed with us and said that the motion to compel arbitration by Wyndham should be denied. Wyndham then appealed to the 11th Circuit. We had oral argument in front of the 11th Circuit back in March. In December of last year, the 11th Circuit ruled in our favor concerning Wyndham and said, no, these plaintiffs do not have to go back to the AAA, which is where they started. So they are pursuing their claims on an individual basis in Florida. Finally, more recently, I filed a new case, as Irene mentioned, on behalf of the Yorks and the physics, and we're seeking putative classes there for Nevada, South Carolina, Maryland. Once again, long process. Among other challenges, we're going to have to invalidate the class action waiver clause. We think we have arguments in that in favor of doing so, but it's going to be a long road. So there's good and bad news here.
Okay, I have about 3 questions in that for
right.
our non-lawyer friends. Putative, the definition of putative?
Putative just
Punitive.
means wannabe. So it's a wannabe class action. I wish that it was the case that if you file something and call it a class action, it means you have automatically a class act. That's not the way it works. Putative means we want to be a class action. The judge is going to have to decide. If the judge certifies the case as a class, then it is a class action. Then people are notified. Then they can decide whether they want to participate or not. And then it moves ahead as a class case. Typically, if a case is certified, the chances for settlement are much greater because now a defendant faces liability of potentially millions of dollars instead of $20,000. But the case would move forward at that point. You could actually have a class certified, no settlement and actually have to try the case. So putative just means we want to be a class action, but the court has to decide. And as I said, that process can easily take a couple of years.
Now,
Yeah, but isn't it more advantageous to be a class action, but also you have to have similar causes of action?
Right.
In other words, the thing is to be certified as a class that you have to have everybody basically having the same problem.
Uniform damages.
Uniform damages, right. Is that correct, Howard? In other words, you can't have a lot of variance.
Yeah, that's correct. Not damages, but liability. And that's probably the reason why I am one of the few lawyers in the country that has been willing to venture into this area on a class basis, because it is correct. You have to have a common claim of liability. So others have tried and floundered, and others have tried to do mass cases where they put 80 or 90 people in one case. The problem is that those lawsuits have emphasized affirmative misrepresentations, which vary from person to person. So the defendant is going to say, you have many different timeshare presentations across the country. Different things were said to different people. There's not a common issue for the class. So what I've done in my putative class cases is focus on the omissions, which we feel are uniform. We feel that and allege that there are certain common material facts which are not disclosed to everyone. So that way we avoid having to say, well, salesperson X in Nevada said this to this person and salesperson Y said this. Our approach is there are certain things which are not told to anyone. Primary one is problem with availability, which from all the Wyndham people that have contacted us, that's a real problem. People cannot get what they want cannot have difficulty staying where they want.
Well, and you had a expert, a former Wyndham executive that filed a declaration, Danielle Henderson, in the Kirchner lawsuit. And are you able to prove the availability issue? Because I have arguments with attorneys all the time that it's always cheaper to book online. And I'm living proof here. I'm at a timeshare resort right now that it was less expensive to use my points than to book online. But in your discovery, I'm sure some of this was sealed. Were you able to get hard facts about, because I talked to someone last week who works for a software tech company where they acquire developer inventory and then rent it out on these other platforms, so probably at a lower rate to get the bodies in the door for the new presentation. So did you find proof in the availability issue?
So, well, that is ultimately, it's going to be up to the court to decide whether we found sufficient proof or not. I mean, I feel good about what we've discovered. I mean, the anecdotal evidence is overwhelming. You've got thousands of complaints about the same thing on the Better Business Bureau website. So when we get to the point of if the cases are not resolved out of court, if we get to the point of the trial, we will have to marshal all that evidence, probably have an expert testify as to what he considers a statistically significant sample of owners, and present evidence that availability is a real issue. I mean, so I feel good that we're moving in the right direction. When we started in Illinois, the magistrate there was willing to let us take a survey. Well, he said it was going to be okay for us to take a survey of Wyndham owners to see whether this was a statistically significant issue. Unfortunately, the case got transferred before we could do the survey, but that's still an option. So the answer is yes, I believe availability is a real issue, and yes, I believe that if we get to trial, we'll be able to show on a statistically significant basis that that affects people. As I say, anecdotally, there's I get calls every week from people who say the same thing. Now, that doesn't mean that you might not get your second, third, or fourth choice, but it's very different than what is suggested in the sales. The sales presentation pitch is basically you'll have the freedom to go all over the world and have great availability. And I don't really think, from what I've seen, that's not correct.
Howard, I have a question on this because on the laws that govern timeshares, is there any federal laws that govern timeshare sales and timeshare abuses, or is this all state law?
State law. So,
but there is the Federal Trade Commission that is regulating unfair and deceptive practices. And so we have everyone file with the FTC and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. But the problem is a timeshare developer, even though they're a massive lender, they're not considered a financial institution. So you can't file a complaint. CFPB will not investigate, but you can tell your story. And there's a link that says tell your story. And you think these big agencies are not listening, but at the last two oral arguments that I attended in Jacksonville, Holden versus Holiday Inn, and another Military Lending Act lawsuit, Lewis versus Blue Green, the CFPB sent an attorney to both of those oral arguments to argue on behalf of the consumer. So it's kind of an uphill battle to make changes, but I think it's important to. But the other thing, Howard, is the oral representation clause. If we get back to misrepresentations, in one of the complaints of yours that I read, and upcoming guest attorney Mike Finn is going to be here May 6th. He was famously quoted in 2016 in the New York Times as calling the oral representation clause the license to lie clause. And in your lawsuit, you said there is a purported agreement where people acknowledge that I don't know the wording of it, but basically you acknowledge that you didn't believe anything the sales agent said. And but you said that is not the law. Could you explain that? Why is that not the law if a contract says that?
Remember, it's a complaint, so it's my allegation that that's not the law. I don't feel that the common law of fraud by inducement is abrogated by those clauses. In other words, fraud. At a very basic level, you cannot lie to someone to get them to enter in a contract and then put in the contract, by the way, whatever we said to you before doesn't count. In my view, the common law of fraud by inducement trumps the disclaimer of oral misrepresentation. I mean, otherwise Mike Finn would be correct. It would be a license to lie. And I don't think we've got to the point where courts are going to allow that. Now, they're going to be different, courts are never going to 100% agree on everything, but to say that that clause gives the timeshare sales representative the license to say whatever he wants, I disagree with that view.
Yeah, let's talk about the timeshare salesperson. So I know that because you did some FINRA arbitration, everybody who's licensed has to, and Irene, you have to take a 663, a 7, and then you get a FINRA license, you get insurance to be able to actually talk about securities. And then, of course, you put in the standard arbitration clause, so you pull them outside of court. But let's talk about the timeshare salesperson. What sort of professional training do they receive? Do they get licensed? Do they get insured? Do they get bonded? Do they have continuing education credits they have to take? What sort of education does a timeshare representative have to go through to represent the timeshare organization?
Well, I can answer that as well.
I'm going to let Irene answer this.
Okay, Irene, answer it. I want to know what sort of education.
My off-the-cuff response would be it's the Wild West, but I'm going to let Irene answer.
Okay, Irene, what sort of education do you have to get to represent a timeshare education
It varies by state.
Okay.
So Missouri, they do not require a license. Virginia does not require a license. There was a Missouri attorney that was unanimously disbarred by the Supreme Court for his gambling and cocaine addiction, misrepresenting his clients' accounts. He was hired to sell timeshares in Branson, Missouri. And so there wasn't anything he had to do. He was already an attorney. Now they have their own in-house training. In Florida and Nevada, you do have to have a Florida real estate license. And I just got my Florida real estate license in October 28th of 2023. So within 18 months to 2 years, I have to do, I believe, a 40-hour continuing education course. So if you file a complaint so we do refer when people, not everybody has the time or temperament to self-advocate. So there are about a half a dozen law firms that we do refer people to if we're asked a legal question. Not all attorneys are created equal. My father would describe some as shysters that are practicing timeshare law, but I know I'd say probably 6 to 8 attorneys that I really trust in the timeshare business. But getting back to the training, it would be internal training, but when there's no real estate license, if you have a complaint with Florida, you file with the Florida Attorney General. If you have a complaint in Nevada and you file with the Nevada Attorney General, they will refer you to the Nevada Real Estate Division, who will do nothing. We had one agent who earned $2.4 million a year and admitted in a lawsuit he filed against the company that he deceived people. And NRED just said, oh, he's just a disgruntled employee, even though that was the 24th complaint we sent against him. And
do they require errors in omission insurance to be able to sell timeshares, E&O?
I think no, because of the oral representation clause.
So all the people, Howard, that you're going against, these timeshare salesmen and companies, you're telling me that there's no errors in omission insurance at all to make a claim against. Would that be correct, Counselor?
Not that I'm aware of. That's correct. I mean, it's something I haven't pursued, but I'm not aware of it. I'm not pursuing any sales representatives individually. Whether there's insurance for Wyndham is something I should actually look at.
Yeah. Okay. And the companies themselves. Now, the other day, Irene was saying Hilton Timeshares has no relationship to the Hilton Corporation. Is that
Well,
correct, Irene?
it's not, they've
It's a
like
separate
Marriott,
company.
yeah, it's just two separate stock symbols. So I think in like 2015, I have to check, Marriott Hotels spun off Marriott Vacation Worldwide. So Hilton Hotels, Hilton Honors is a separate stock symbol from Hilton Grand Vacations. But if I'm a Hilton Honors member, credit card member, and I want to use my Hilton points, they'll say, would you like to stay 3 nights for $99 and learn? And they typically don't say it's a timeshare. We have a vacation program. And so a lot of the complaints are from people, including our co-host, Kim, who just responded to a Hilton Honors. So that, in other words, they have a marketing relationship with their hotel side.
Isn't that material misleading? Misleading of a material fact? Because when I went to the Hilton, they sent me to this timeshare in Hilton Head, South Carolina, and I always thought this had a relationship with the Hilton, and there was never a disclaimer that says our company is totally separate and distinct from Hilton. And the reason I would buy from Wyndham is because I would think, well, I've stayed at the Wyndham hotels. Wyndham has been good to me. And yet it sounds to me that this Wyndham that sells is a separate legal entity that has nothing to do with the Wyndham Hotel. Would that be correct, Howard, that they're both separate entities and they never disclosed it?
They used to be a single entity, but I guess as with Hilton, there was a spinoff. So now there's the timeshare Wyndham business and there's the Wyndham hotel business. And the timeshare business has undergone a lot of name changes. So it's hard to keep up with the names, but there's Wyndham Vacation Ownership, which was the timeshare business.
Yeah. But I would assume this is a misrepresentation of material fact.
I don't think so because
Really?
they're. I mean, I think it's true that Wyndham, cashes in with the timeshare business, cashes in on the reputation of the hotels, but it's a matter of public record that they're now two separate companies. So Wyndham Vacationship ownership is connected with Wyndham Destinations. Worldmark is an affiliate. They underwent a name change. The parent company is now called Travel and Leisure, which trades under the stock symbol TNL, which is separate than Wyndham Hotels. So, I agree that the timeshare business has probably benefited from Wyndham Hotels, but it is a matter of public record that they're separate corporations.
Right. And how do they explain this point system? I mean, that's the problem. I never bought this.
That's a very good basic.
I feel like I'm buying a security.
Right.
That is not a security that I get points, which I don't understand.
Right. No, before I got into that's a very good question, because the old timeshare model was simple. It's like, I like skiing in Vail. I like skiing at staying at this particular resort, Vail Creek condominiums. I want to buy the right to stay at that condominium the first week of February every year. So I know exactly what I'm getting. I can go there the first week of February and stay there. And then if I want to go someplace else, I would have the option of trading it for something else. And there's a public marketplace to do that. But that model has gone by the wayside. Instead, you now buy, quote, points. And these points are supposed to be currency to stay at destinations. A typical average contract with Wyndham is you buy 84,000 points for $21,000. But unfortunately, you quickly learn that those 84,000 points don't get you very much. So then there's this almost immediate pressure to buy more points. If you do actually book and you stay someplace, you're told sometimes before you're even allowed to get a parking pass for your car or access to your room, you need to attend a quote owner update meeting. Well, the owner update meeting is really just another sales presentation to get you to buy more points. I mean, a very telling fact that we cite in all the complaints is someone who has paid $21,000, say for 84,000 points, can go on eBay the next morning and unfortunately see that they can buy the same number of points for $1. So that tells you something right there, that this is a liability. So the the point system, in my view, is not good for consumers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, it seems to me it's like borderline of security. You know, that from the SEC versus Howey case, an investment enterprise with the expectation of profits derived solely by the efforts of others. And so if they ever mention, hey, you know, the value of your timeshare could go up, you know, it could change the composition, especially this point system, into a security. Or we used to say in Florida, it was the land of unregistered securities,
Right.
which I spent so much time in my younger days, going way back, that these real estate people would basically be selling unregistered securities all up and
Right.
down Florida.
Well,
and this point system, who can understand the point system?
That's an interesting legal concept to explore, which is perhaps why you want to start becoming more of a timeshare attorney and join me on some of my cases.
I enjoy my semi-retirement. Thank you, Councilman.
Okay.
But no, the thing is, I just looked at this through what Irene was doing, and I was going, wow, you're just, these people are actually running around selling unregistered securities because of the point system, and nobody's doing anything about it. And there's just absolutely no way you can understand it. And I'm not even sure in the point system, can they change this arbitrarily? In other words, you need 16,000 points this year, but next year you need 32,000 points.
Right.
Do they have a change? Can they just make this change?
There's a very thick binder, about 3 inches thick, that lists their resorts and tells you how many points you need to stay at a particular place. And, you know, my understanding is they do have discretion to change that.
Okay. Do they ever disclose the fact that this can be arbitrarily and capriciously changed at the whim of management, anytime and place? Is that disclosed in big bold letters?
Not using those words, but in more standard legal language, I believe that disclosure exists. Just like there's a disclosure in the contract which says, you know, it's like after telling people they can go wherever they want, stay wherever they want, there's a disclosure in the contract saying, well, this is all subject to availability. So, you know, it becomes a common sense question whether these sales pitches are abrogated by these boilerplate type disclosures.
Well, and I wanted to ask too that I believe it's a unilateral contract where benefits can be changed or deleted at any time, which makes you wonder, why should you sign a contract? And the biggest complaint has been rental. So in addition to availability, agents routinely say, if you can't use your timeshare, you can rent it out. And I know in the case of Diamond Resorts back in 2016, this family was encouraged to buy points so they could rent out enough to pay their maintenance fees. And then in 2011, that benefit was removed, which meant they were driven to default because they couldn't afford the maintenance fees on that many points. So when you have benefits that can come and go, you really don't know what you're buying. And so a rental, I would say availability and being promised the ability to rent is two of the biggest complaints. And the other is renting. I think renting and availability, would you say those are the two top complaints, Howard?
Well, I mean, as you've read in our complaint, I have like a kind of a standard litany of 12 to 14 points disclosures that I don't think are adequately made. I mean, in my mind, the deception starts right at the beginning, where people on a prize or free dinner pass to attend a 90-minute sales presentation. the 90-minute sales presentation is never 90 minutes. It's 6 or 7 hours. There's a podium presentation which starts the process. They, put up nice pictures of where you're going to be able to stay. They do math showing that you're going to save tens of thousands of dollars on your vacation costs. This is kind of the standard format that people have described to me. The sales pitches that you can lock in future vacations at today's prices. And then after that podium presentation, people tell me, and this is, public knowledge online. If you look at the Better Business Bureau website, you'll see the same story again and again. Then you have a one-on-one hard sell where it's the prospective owner, the couple, going one-on-one with a timeshare sales representative. They will often get a tour of facility, looking at all these wonderful accommodations. And then, it's a hard sell where the price might start at $60,000, then it's reduced. And it's almost, it's like being in a car sales, being in a car dealer's sales environment on steroids, okay? So then they go to talk to the manager who comes back and offers a lower price. People are now starting to get fatigued. They want to get out. They're physically tired. Also, this was supposed to be their vacation. They've been locked up in a room, and there's a emotional sales pitch. Well, it's important for your family. Do you value vacations? And then there's this, it's good for today only. It's good for, it's only good for today. This is a one-time deal. You have to sign on today. And then typically it's not unusual. A sales representative will say, and then here's my card, here's my number. I'll act as your personal concierge. I'll walk you through the process of making reservations. I will assist you. And then typically from the stories you can read online, after closing, the sales representatives cannot be contacted. I also think it's significant that Wyndham has made a practice of videotaping closings. So now I haven't seen one personally, but they videotape people saying it's almost, it's just a strange process where they say, have we said anything to mislead you? And they videotape it. Have you been promised anything? So they videotape it because they have so many complaints. So it's not just one or two things. It's a whole.
It looks like the Wolf of Wall Street has made it into the timeshare. Did Jordan Belfort, the Wolf of Wall Street, is either a trainer?
So
Actually, one of the people complaining was an attorney that took down the Wolf of Wall Street. But let me explain about how the recorded closing got started, because that had a lot to do with our group.
All right.
There were 400 people who had filed complaints with the Arizona Attorney General in 2016 and 2017. And I received a call from Diamond's PR firm in Beverly Hills, Prozac. Irene, we're going to go beyond the assurance of discontinuance. We're going to record the closing session. And I hit the ceiling and I said, this will be used as an entrapment. And so the salesman becomes your best friend. And, we've had people on the show, if they're Filipino, they said they felt like they were playing them by having a Filipino sales agent. If you're Hispanic. And so don't say anything during the recorded closing about my helping you to refinance, because I was in finance before I came here. I have contacts outside the industry, or I will help you rent your points. Don't say anything at closing. Don't say anything at closing about being able to offset your maintenance fees. And so you don't. And then the response from corporate is, if this was important to you, you should have said something on the recorded closing. It's the perfect entrapment.
Okay, let's talk about commission disclosures, okay, because that's big in my industry, because the Department of Labor wants all the commissions to be disclosed, especially in the qualified plan arena. And are there commission disclosures that take place in the timeshare area? In other words, how much does the big boss made? Because I've been on some of these junkets before. They don't seem to like me, and so it never worked out. But there's an agent that comes in, and the big boss man comes in because you don't buy. But there was no commission disclosures as to what sort of commissions are these being paid, or are there, and we just don't know about them. So Howard, any commission disclosures?
Well, first of all, my understanding is it is a commission-based enterprise where the sales representatives are on commission. I am not aware of disclosures, but I'll defer to Irene on that. I haven't seen any, but
Well, we do know that Michael Brown made over $7 million, and Mark Wang made $6.7 million. So I guess the CEOs.
So it's a good business. If I get disbarred, I become a timeshare salesman. Would that be correct, Irene?
Well, the lawsuit I read, he was making $2.4 million a year, so that's pretty good earnings.
Well, what is that in terms of percentage of sales? In other words,
up to
somebody
50%.
sells a $60,000 timeshare. How much does the agent make? How much does the general agent make, or the big boss man make, and how much goes to the company?
Right. It's usually about 50% of a timeshare sale. So if you buy or sell a house, you pay 6% commission. You buy a timeshare from a developer, it's 50%, but not all of that goes to the sales agent. And whenever somebody says, I just go to a presentation to get the free gift, I explain gifts are not free. They're factored into the cost of everybody
of course.
A timeshare complaint. So, but it is not at all unusual to make 400 or 500,000, and the top sellers,
of course,
$1 or $2 million a year. But it's not easy. There are people that come and go all the time.
But isn't that also a material fact? Myself as a buyer, at least as in my industry, that I know what the commissions are by the person who's representing to be my best friend and buddy, that he's making off the timeshare. So if they're selling me a $6,000 timeshare, he and his buddy are going to take 50%, or they're going to make $3,000 goes to the house. It's not disclosed. And why not?
That's a good question, because as a stockbroker, you always see what your commission is on your stock trade. But you don't
because
see what
today there's a big push to fiduciary relationships, at least in the securities industry and certainly in the benefits department, in terms of disclosing commissions to the buyer. And it seems to me in this particular case, which makes it great for a person who is totally unscrupulous and just wants to make money as a salesperson to go to, because you're not disclosing, to me, a material fact of any purchases. What is the commissions that are being paid to these producers?
You're coming up with one great new idea after another. We're gonna securities violations, commissions. These are important.
Commissions. Yeah, I mean, Howard, it is so big in our industry right now.
I know.
Disclosures of compensation, especially when, like you're saying, Irene, I'm going to be your representative. I'm going to walk you through the process. What's your commission?
Well, and that would be more in the arena of the Federal Trade Commission and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, I believe, rather than state legislation. And in 2020, timeshare sales were number 9 on the Federal Trade Commission's top 10 scam list, and number 10 were timeshare resales, find a buyer. But one thing I want to get back to, because it is just so important, in the Steins versus Westgate that we'll be attending on this Thursday, the argument is whether a timeshare stay is more like a residential stay or more like a transient hotel stay, because the Military Lending Act exempts arbitration. So when you talk about, and Mike Finn, who's going to be an upcoming guest, he said arbitration is not the problem. It's being required to use an arbitrator near the resort. So most of the attorneys feel that, as I do, that arbitration is a kangaroo court. I've heard of 3 extreme adverse rulings where an active duty service member was disputing a $12,000 loan and the judgment against them was $66,000, where over $50,000 was the resort's attorney's fees. So how do you feel about a timeshare loan being a mortgage as opposed to a personal loan?
Good question.
Yeah, I haven't got into that area yet, but Irene, are you aware of how arbitration awards have gone generally for people who have filed them? Because in the FINRA area, awards are published. There's a FINRA database where you can see the results of all investor arbitrations. I haven't seen anything like that for JAMS or the American Arbitration Association. And, there seems to be a general feeling that arbitration is not consumer friendly, but I'm wondering if you have seen statistics there. I did see one study that said that claimants in just generally in arbitrations before the AAA and JAMS win 44% of the time. But I was wondering, Irene, what data you've seen, because very, very little of this data seems to be public. Very few cases actually seem to go ahead in arbitration, just like very few cases in state courts seem to be actually tried against Wyndham. So I'm wondering if you're aware of any more data.
Well, what was the 44% figure? Was that the percentage wins for the?
That was from a general study of arbitration in general, not just timeshares, but 44% of the time claimants in arbitrations, meaning consumers, prevail. But that was not limited to timeshares. So I'm wondering what you've learned about other than the three bad examples. Do you have any knowledge as to what happens?
Timeshare arbitration in timeshare is private and binding. So
Right.
I don't believe there is any data.
Right.
But now Mike Finn feels arbitration in general is okay, but it's in timeshare where you're required to use a developer, an arbitrator near the resort. One of someone who resolved their dispute is a retired criminal investigator, and he met an arbitrator in an airport lounge, and he was coming back from a Perk golf trip sponsored by the developer. How can you say that's an unbiased opinion if you're paid $400 to $800, unlike a judge that's paid for with taxpayer money?
Right.
So you really have, since you could be on the hook for the developer's attorney's fees, you're really taking a chance. And one thing, like BB&T lost a lawsuit where they tried to slip in an arbitration clause after the fact. So this Steins versus Westgate was filed on February 2nd of, I think, 2022. I think it's 2022. But on February 1st, the day before, they put on their website, you cannot access your WOW World of Westgate loyalty benefits without agreeing to arbitration. Now, if you signed a contract where you did not agree to arbitrate, can they slip it in after the fact like that?
They can, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work. Interesting they would try something like that. I just have another question about this, and I'm going after the commission brokers since I work with them all the time at the front level. At least they're securities people and insurance people. But so going after these people, is there like when we bring on a registered rep or a broker, we go through FINRA has a broker check, and we can look through a form called the form ADV, which tells me all the irregularities that this person may be involved in, all the complaints. Does that exist in the timeshare area? So I'm meeting with Irene. I've never bought a timeshare before. She's my person who I'm talking to at Wyndham. Can I do a background check on Irene similar to I can do on a securities registered rep by looking at her form ADV? Can we do that, Howard?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, there are a lot of horror stories out on the web about the actual criminal background of many of these sales representatives. I think Irene
Okay.
familiar with that it's just a lot of very sad
So
stories.
I do background checks all the time, and everybody that I meet. I even did one on you, Howard, before you even came on. Okay.
What did you
Part of it is
learn? If I may ask, what did you
you're a
learn?
member of the Florida Bar in good standing. That's all I need to know. I'm a member of the Florida
All right.
Bar. So anyway, the thing is, so my question is, and that's because I was actually scammed 2 decades ago by somebody who claimed to be an attorney, and he was a disbarred convicted felon, and he ripped me off for about $147,000. So I have a little, so I'm a little more cautious because I made a mistake. I sent him to a company that didn't do the background check on him. And so the thing is, I do background checks. To me, it's so important that you do a background check on who am I sitting with, who's giving me all this oral representation advice. And what you're telling me is I have no ability to do a background check on that person. Would that be correct, Counselor? There's no database. There's no Form A, there's nothing.
We run public background checks, which are not as accurate, but we've certainly, it has the arrest records, and it's, we've published them on our Diamond Facebook group, on our files. As long as you publish the adjudication along with the charges, then that's public record, and you can do that. But we've had identity theft, forgery, armed robbery. There was a quality assurance person in Florida that spent 4 years in jail for burglarizing 7 homes, some while occupied. Mm-hmm. So, and they're working with seniors in lending. Petite theft, grand theft. I remember those.
And these are the people that are representing the company. They're agents for the company.
Yes. And they used to say, we're not responsible for what our sales agent said. And I put that in several headlines.
Don't they have vicarious liability and respondent superior? I mean, it'd be great for me to say I'm not responsible for all my producers out there that are talking to you about pensions. I'm just totally not responsible. And then they lie, cheat, and steal, and that's all okay.
Well, after my headlines, they changed it to, we can only rely on what is in the written contract, which is a sanitized version of saying, we're not responsible. And even if there's a recording where you have proof of fraud, the contract will be canceled without admitting liability. So, I mean, what other kind of firm will just say anything goes with, and in one of your, it might have been Tennessee. No, I think it was your lawsuit, Howard, where Wyndham had an agent with 30 complaints, 42 complaints, and 57 complaints, and they were not terminated. It's.
I'm not sure it was mine. It doesn't ring a bell.
You mean the sales representative, the agent for the company, had a litany of complaints, and they continued to keep that person.
It was our Chambelt in Tennessee. I think that was Aubrey Gibbs.
We're kind of getting towards the end, so I wanted to ask Irene just 2 general questions. Number 1, why do you feel federal and state regulators have not got more involved? And 2, I think you should talk a little bit about what you do for people as opposed to the average timeshare exit lawyer. You do a very valuable service as a volunteer advocate.
Well, let me answer the second question first, and that is we. So I'm kind of more out front maybe than some of our other board members, but we have a couple board members that put in as much time as I do on this. And so there's a board member that knows much more about Blue Green than I do, and volunteers that know more about Westgate than I do. Because I was trained as a court report writer with CASA, Court Appointed Special Advocate for Children in Foster Care, and let me, I think we have enough time to just run down this real life example that called 30 minutes before the show. She's a widow. She bought a deed in 2003 with her husband, second deed in 2012. The problem started in Florida in 2022. Her husband had cancer, and you must have someone, you need to get points so your children do not inherit the deeds, which is, not true. You can disclaim that inheritance and then upsold again because they didn't take back the deeds. And so here she's giving me all this information, and I will type it down as she provides it. People don't know their numbers, so I make them get. We don't review their contracts because we are self-advocacy. We want you to understand your contract. I can easily help you put this in the format of a clear, concise report. And we have a very good volunteer who's excellent with people, but she's a hunt and peck typist. So to be able to get that and then send it to Wyndham or whomever, renting is an industry-wide complaint. And then if we give the resort a chance to respond, if they don't respond in a week or 10 days, then we start the filing with the appropriate attorney general. People don't even know, if you're a Minnesota resident and you bought in Florida, you filed with the Florida attorney general. So just basic questions like that. We do have attorneys that we can go to if it's just a legal question we can't answer. And I have to say, Wyndham's been pretty good when I've been on the phone with people to resolve disputes. But there's a need for timeshare attorneys, and there's a need for self-advocacy. Nick had mentioned a timeshare cancellation information Facebook group, and the admin of that group is an attorney. And so it's a good relationship. And your first question again?
Why do you think there's been less action by federal and state regulators?
Well, because they're big federal and state regulators. And I do feel I was extremely encouraged that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau did send an attorney out to argue on behalf of the consumers. I think that the laws are there, but they're not enforced in timeshare. The product may be regulated, but the process of selling it is not. And it's an uphill battle. And this is why if nobody files complaints, nobody thinks there's any problems. So with Wyndham, I believe, and Hilton, there are 1,900 Better Business Bureau complaints, as opposed to Disney has 99. Marriott has 200 complaints. So it's really hard to say there's no problem. So if we can get enough people to file with the Federal Trade Commission, and it's very easy, it's online, and tell your story to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, because they work jointly. So the amicus brief, they've filed amicus brief in I think 2 or 3, and they file those amicus briefs jointly. Friend of the court for our non-attorney friends. But we're getting close to the end of the show, and this was really helpful for me. I've been taking a lot of notes, and Nick, it's nice to have you as just being welcome to our world of timeshare here.
A different world. That's all I can say.
And next week,
it does sound to me to be the wild, wild west. It seems to me this would be the infancy of the securities industry, totally non-regulated, wild, wild west. But it looks like for the poor person who really has a big criminal record or got disbarred and everything went wrong for them, become a timeshare salesman, because
right.
Why not? In other words, there's nothing stopping you. It's just absolutely amazing. Yeah, but we are at the hour.
A lot of people like their timeshares.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
If you haven't seen it, I recommend Googling John Oliver and timeshares, and you'll get a nice perspective. He makes a number of points quite similar to the ones you advanced, Nick.
Wow. Okay, we'll do. But want to thank Howard Prosnitz, our subject matter expert on the area of timeshares, and we will see you next week on the Pod TV show, Timeshare, Solution or Surrender. Take care. Bye-bye.